Kia ora and welcome to another episode of the Leadership Lounge, a space for healthcare leaders to take a moment, space to get a fresh perspective, to get a new look or a different way of thinking about the challenges and the things that you're facing in your day-to-day work right now. I'm Katie, I'm your host. I've worked in healthcare for over 30 years doing a range of different jobs, and now I work with leaders and their teams so that they can feel supported and energised as they manage the demands and the complexity of what working in healthcare feels like right now. So glad you could join me for another episode. Thank you for the comments and the feedback that I'm getting on the podcast. It is really delightful, and working on how I can share some of those comments. But I would love it if you would click follow, write a review, tell somebody else about it, so that we can start to spread this idea of how we're all showing up and working in a environment and a time which is quite challenging, to say the least, on a number of levels, wherever in the world you are. So this week I wanted to talk about, well, really, I suppose, a confession as to how I fell into the pit of one of the bits of advice I often give out when I'm coaching or working with people or teams. This idea of focusing on what you can control. So I found myself quite absorbed over the last few weeks, to say the least, with the elections in the US. And I have been watching a whole load of stuff, whether it be in Instagram or on Facebook or on Threads or on the news. I have become slightly obsessed, and really it's not been doing me any good, but it's kind of like I'm so curious, I'm so intrigued, and up until the result of the election, I was kind of like really hoping for a shift and a change, or the hope and the positivity over a whole range of different topics. I don't want to get into the politics per se, but let's just say I wasn't hoping Trump was going to win. However, I was really curious about why people were a fan of him and why were they voting for him. So I got quite in depth. And basically, this was all stuff outside of my control. But I found myself completely swamped in it and taking all my energy and all my time and all my focus. And so when I spend a lot of time with people who are in healthcare struggling with stuff that is outside of their control, but they are rightfully concerned about, I will gleefully go, have you heard of the circles of control and influence and concern? And you need to focus on the space of control, and then you can build into your influence, and that's how we generate change. So this is what I say. And yeah, I found myself completely ignoring all of that advice. So if I do, over the next few weeks, happen to be working with you or talking with you and I happen to mention it, you can just go, really? Really? Tell me about how you're managing that. Because it's hard. So really, I wanted to talk about what those three circles are, where they came from, bit of, kind of context and examples, but also bring it back to the fact that, okay, it's really easy to say, oh yeah, just focus what's within your control. It's like, okay, how do we do that? How do we actually do that when the world feels like it could be tipping upside down around us? What is it that's going to help us do that? So we are going to explore some of those things, and I hope that there'll be something within that will give you a perspective, an idea, and something that you're going to be able to pick up and work with. So first up, this idea of these circles of control, influence, and concern. Where has this idea come from? And up until I was doing a bit of research for this episode, I was pretty convinced that the original idea came from Stephen Covey in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Now, you may remember, or you may have heard an episode a few weeks ago when we were talking about sharpening the saw. So it's that same book, so quite a classic book. It's been around for a while, written by a white guy. So it's in that sort of context, and I thought that's where the idea had come from. Turns out no, actually came from earlier than that, a guy called Kurt Lewin in the 1940s, and it was this idea of influence. Predominantly it started in this space of what is the circle of influence, and it was around the acknowledgement and the awareness that we are influenced by things all around us, as well as our ability to influence others, and just understanding the dynamics within how we do that and what that looks like. So that's where it kind of started, and then Stephen Covey has taken it into this, kind of built upon it and popularised it without a doubt. And he had two circles, circle of concern and a circle of influence. And the angle for him and his book around this was really about how we stay in that, or how we help shift into a proactive way of working. And the idea that if you're very reactive, you're really focusing most of your attention in that circle of concern. Things that you have no influence or control over, but you are worried about. So for me, for example, the results of the US election. And if you take from a healthcare example, things could be around the decisions around ratios of nursing staff versus using an acuity tool. There are decisions and things being made that are outside of your control that you might well have to deal with, and so they are of concern to you. There could be things like the recruitment processes, or the number of nurses we've got, or the retention rates. There's a lot of stuff, okay, in that big bucket of concern. You can go even broader and think around what is happening within the governments wherever you're working, whether that be in regards to social justice or the environment. There's a lot of things that we can put into this bucket or this circle of concern. And so he then had this circle of influence. And the idea is that if you focus your space and your time and your energy in this circle of influence, you then feel more empowered, you've got a bit more momentum, you don't get lost, you don't get that kind of like, what's the point, that apathy, and that you can actually start to generate change that if you build and build and build that momentum, will start to actually move into that circle of concern. So I think of a good example now around how if we are using our influence around sharing ideas and stories about what the difference ratios would make versus an acuity tool, we can then start to influence what those decisions are and actually then impact factors that could be going on in our circle of concern. But the trick is to do the actions that you can do, not to sit in that, oh my goodness, they're going to do this. Oh Lord, what are they going to do about that? What happens if only I had that? What if I could do this? So when we're stuck in that circle of concern, there's often this space of being a victim or blaming others or looking outside of ourselves. And it becomes disempowering, but that apathetic, but it can also be quite sort of very negative, down talking all the time. So it started with those two sort of circles, and he's got, I reread the chapter in his book, and I actually have to say, actually quite a dry read, I have to say. Maybe it was just my recovery from the US election reading it, but the kind of idea of how these circles can expand based on where you put your focus, your attention is where it goes. And then over time, what seems to have been added is these becomes three circles. So we've now got a circle of concern, all those big things like, world poverty, the environment, climate crisis, all of that stuff that fits in there. We've got a circle of influence, and then you've got a circle of control. So it comes right back down to, what can I control? And this is the conversation, like I say, I would often have with people around, okay, yes, there's a whole load of stuff going on, but in this particular scenario, what can I control? It can even come down to those conversations when you're talking about people that you're struggling to work with or not getting on with. It's like, okay, what can you control in that? So it becomes very inward centered around, okay, I can control how I show up. I can control how I look after myself so that I am best prepared for a day at work. And you start to have an incredible sense of agency, because you are doing things that actually no one can stop you doing or not doing, because you've got complete control in this space. And the theory is that if you start focusing in this space of control, what can I control, it then starts to move into that space of influence. So if you start to, if you're showing up every day, let's take a charge nurse example. If you're showing up every day and delivering consistently around a daily huddle about, I'm going to make sure we give some appreciative feedback. I am going to make sure we have a safe space for people to raise any questions and concerns. I'm not going to make them feel stupid for asking questions, and we're going to share those concerns. We're going to learn from each other. We're going to stay curious. We're also going to make sure we point out some positives. If you decide that's what I'm going to do, I can take control of this because I'm in a position that I can do this, then you can start to influence that culture on the ward. And you can influence how people are going to treat each other. You can create that space of psychological safety. So you're focusing on what you can do rather than going, oh, it's so ridiculous. No one ever listens to me. How am I ever going to get this done? If only I could do this, if only I could do that. If you shrink it right down, what can I control? Okay, I can run a really cool huddle every day, and that will start to influence, and then it grows. And then that influence grows as you get more and more people. You can start to influence some of those spaces of concern around, whether that be in the organisation or even on a bigger, on a national or worldwide kind of front. So that's the kind of ideas that this sits with. So there's some really negative impacts, and that's definitely what I've been feeling of the last few weeks, when you do shift your focus from that space of what can I control and what can I influence into a space of what am I concerned about. And I was concerned, and I got quite distracted. I wasn't very focused, definitely wasn't being very productive, wasting time without a doubt. And it was really just kind of adding layers of anxiety to where I was at. So not very useful, quite reactive, and not very empowering all in all. So that's what it can feel like when we spend too much of our time in that space of focusing on what is in our concern but not in our control. So my question, when I noticed this the other day, I was like, that's what I'm doing. I had that real realization. I'm just focusing on something that I'm concerned about. I'm not paying any attention to what I can control. So my question became, well, how do you shift? What are the things that, in the face of what can be some enormous concerns, no staffing is a good, it's not a good one. It's a really real one. I don't have enough staff for the day. You often have no control over that. You've got what you've got. If you focus on the concern, I don't have enough staff, versus what can I control? But how do we shift? How do we do those things? So that's what I've been searching for, because I'm thinking everyone talks, if you look at all the articles, and there's some good blog posts and there's some good explanations. But when it comes to how do you shift? How do you do that? So I did find a couple of ideas. You can tell I'm not completely convinced that there's a lot to hold on to, but it's a starting point. I think the most important one was around being present. And I'll pop in the links in the show notes, a great little video I found on probably Instagram, to be fair. And it was one of those ones that did actually stop me doom scrolling and reminded me of the value of being present and how simple it is to just stop and be present with where you are. What's the time? What colour shirt are you wearing? Or what colour top are you wearing? And then look around the room. What in the room that you're in matches what you're wearing, matches the colour of what you're wearing. And it was just this amazing reminder around the power of being present, and that actually that's where things start from, the reminder of where you're at. So this is great when I'm walking around the park or when I'm doing something, looking up and looking at the trees and just noticing where the clouds are or what the trees are looking like. This idea of where can you find your space to just go, let's just be present. Let's just take a moment, tapping into my senses. What can I see? What can I hear? What does it feel like at the moment in terms of what can I sense on my skin? So being present. The next element was this idea of self-compassion. Now, this is a topic that it's really interesting. It comes up a lot for me when I'm talking with people because generally I think people are doing better than they think they are, because the majority of people I get to work with care a lot about what they do and hold themselves to incredible high standards and want to impact and make a big difference. And when that is hard or they hit up with barriers or things get in the way, they really do feel that quite painfully and quite personally. So I like to remind people, this is tough. You're dealing with X, Y, Z and life is complicated and life is messy. You need to show yourself as much compassion as you're talking about the people that you work with or the communities that you're caring for. Compassion is not pie. There is enough compassion to go around. There is enough for you as well as enough for the people that you're working with. So self-compassion was a space. And Christine Neff is the go-to expert on self-compassion, and on her website there are some amazing self-compassion exercises you can do if this feels like completely foreign to you and you wouldn't know where to start. But I think it's that good reminder that being compassionate when we are holding a lot of concerns around the world is an example of the goodness in us. So show yourself some compassion. The next thing that I found in terms of suggestions was this idea of building a supportive network. Now, I talk about networks and connections a lot in my work. One of my favourite quotes is a Brené Brown quote around, we are not meant to do this alone. We're wired to connect. We're not supposed to do this alone. We are built to be in communities and in networks. So our connections are so important. And whether you're thinking about this as your professional network to help you develop into where you're going on your career, whether this is that idea of your personal advisory board around the people that you check in with, whether it's that square squad idea, the people that have really got your back and that you feel incredibly safe with, that you trust, that they are going to look after you on your bad days and pull you in on your daft days and encourage you and cheer you along on your great days. Whatever that is, it's this idea of this supportive network. So sharing what the concerns are, sharing those ideas, but also not just trailing off into that negative down talking. So a supportive network is going to be able to bring the conversation up, and it's going to be able to turn those things around and think about different ways of looking at things. I guess what I try to do with this podcast, this idea of a fresh perspective or a different perspective on stuff. It can be really easy and really normal to just start going down this track around how we feel about something. And we need that bit of a tap on the shoulder to go, hey, yeah, that's all true, but have you seen this? Or have you thought about that? So it's this idea of this supportive network. Another idea I came across for this suggestion for how do you build into that circle of control and then expanding into that space of influence is around setting goals and setting really specific goals. So not saying, so I really need to in order to help this area of control, I'm going to make sure I do some more exercise because that's going to be good for me. And that really kind of vague idea. But if you say, I'm going to do 10 minutes of yoga every day and I'm going to do it first thing in the morning so that it's done and I don't have to worry about it when I get distracted with other things. And I'm going to do it after the kettle's boiled and while my hot drink is just chilling there for a second. I've got really specific about when it is, how am I going to do it, what am I going to tag it to, all that idea of habit forming. And I think I mentioned... now this is going to get me. Did I mention it in last week's podcast or did I mention it in last week's No Jedi email? Who knows? However, good point of pause there, just to say I do a weekly email. It's called the No Jedi email. It has absolutely nothing to do with Star Wars, and it is a bright spot in your inbox. It is not another list of things that you're supposed to do or try or think about, but it is 1, 2, maybe 3 ideas of things that are of interest, practical, pragmatic, hopeful and inspiring, and just a way of going, you know what? I can keep going. I can keep doing this, that there is good out there, and yes, this is possible. So it's that inspiring, encouraging email that just pings into your inbox every week. You can sign up at the show notes, or you can sign up at www.katiequinney.com/subscribe. So yes, so I can't remember where I put it, whether it was in the email or whether it was in last week's podcast, but I talked about that I'm doing a yoga challenge for November. And yes, I am only doing 10 minutes a day. That was the minimum amount my yoga app lets me do. So that's what I'm sticking with. And I've done a couple of sessions where I've done a bit longer when I've had more time, but I've got up every morning and done this yoga every day. And I'm actually quite impressed with myself, because we are now I'm now quickly looking around to find the date. Oh, it is only the 8th. I don't feel quite as excited now. I thought we were like 2 weeks in. It feels like I've been doing it for 2 weeks. Hey, that's actually pretty good, because if I've only been doing it for 8 days, I'm feeling pretty good then. I missed the first day, and the point was, okay, so I missed the first. Okay, let's not write off November. Let's just start. So there was getting over the start line is the most important thing, but it's setting a really small goal and being specific about that. So setting that goal allows me to focus on what is in my control. I can get up and I can do this 10 minutes of yoga every day. So what's a small, tangible, very realistic, very practical goal that you can build on every day? Or, I'm going to get this done by X time. So setting goals is another way of staying within that circle of control and building into that circle of influence. The other thing I found was about learning, really, this growth mindset, this idea of curiosity. And I guess, to be fair, that's what triggered this podcast and triggered my shift from sitting in that circle of concern and being all consumed by everything to do with everything to do with the US election. It was that curiosity that sparked around, well, how do you move? If I know that being in my circle of control is supposed to be better for me, how do I get out of this? And so that was the trigger for me, this idea of curiosity and this idea of growth mindset and learning. I can do better than this. I know it's not the best thing for me, so how do I do it? So there's a few examples there of how what's going to be the best hook for you in terms of what's going to help you get into that space where you're in the area of what you can control. Now, a person that writes about this from a very, very similar sort of perspective is Kerry Evans. I've mentioned his book in the past, Perform Under Pressure, and he talks about it is in space of 3 circles. And the exercise I did when I did a session with him was around think about something that is coming up. And for me, I had this particular meeting, a regular meeting that I absolutely dreaded and I was behaving quite badly in. And so you had to write down these 3 circles. So what can't I control? What can I control? And what can I influence? So very similar kind of concept. But it was, again, he makes it quite a strong case around you can actually influence more than you think you can. And you get there by noticing what you can control. And actually you can influence more things. So you'd start off with can't control. I can't control the agenda. I can't control how so-and-so is going to react. I can't control what they're going to talk about here, and I can't control this. But when I thought about what I could control, so I could control how I responded to various different questions. I could control whether I suggested an item for the agenda beforehand. I could control whether I encouraged a comment. I could control my energy that I am using, my vibe that I give off as I walk into the room. And that actually meant I could start to influence more, which meant that I would actually have more control in that space. So when I got really specific with this example, very, very similar kind of concept, but it was more the flow that he describes in his book around those things. So very sort of similar kind of concepts. But when I really looked at the chapter in his book where he talks about this, it was, what stood out to me was this idea of making visual boundaries to create mental boundaries. So very keen on the fact that you draw these circles, you draw them and list them. And so what I then noticed when I went back to these other websites, which was talking about the 3 circles and what they mean and what they are, they're all very visual, this idea of these 3 circles. So I'll put some links to some of the better ones that I found around the circles of influence and the circles of control. I've also, of course, because I love doing this kind of stuff, created one that you can print and download that you can then fill in. And I think as I've been doing this research, I think it's about listing these things. What is it that is in your circle of concern right now? What are the things that bother you and bug you? And then thinking about what is in your control. What are the things that you can do in the space you're in right now, in the job that you're in right now, in the whatever setting that is? And actually, when we start to look at those lists and we turn inwards, there's a lot we can control. And then we can start to think about, okay, what are those spaces I can then influence? So there's something very much about writing it down and being very visual around it. And what we get from that, we shift from that space of being reactive and very passive and having no energy and feeling quite negative and feeling like a victim. We've now shifted to a space of confidence, of agency, of momentum. You're now being proactive. You can feel empowered and joyful almost about the work that you've got, because you know that you've got this stuff that you control, but also look at all this stuff I'm going to be able to influence now. So there you go. From my downward spiral that I faced over the last few weeks as I became completely absorbed by the US election, noticing that this was something completely in my area of concern, and getting curious about, okay, how do we shift? How do we move into that circle of control when we are stuck in this circle of concern about the big things that are going on for us right now? And we've got these ideas, this list of ideas that can help you move and focus into that space of control, about being present, about having a supportive network, showing yourself some self-compassion, setting goals, these realistic, small steps, smart goals. And then the idea of curiosity and growth mindset and being curious. Yeah, definitely curious about, okay, what does this look like? What is it? And making those very visual, writing them down, being very clear. It's reminding yourself, so that constant reminder about stuff. So the concept of these circles of control, circle of influence, circle of concern is something that you're going to find in a lot of places. It's something that is applicable in a number of scenarios. I hope this has given you a sort of a taster of those different things, and definitely within the show notes there'll be some resources into those different areas. And oh dear, reminder then, I was like looking up, I'm like, oh, my notes have all gone. The other thing I was going to say at the end of this is proven to be a longer episode than normal. I hope you've stuck with me. Thank you for sticking with me. Definitely in the No Jedi email a couple of weeks ago, I shared an idea about note-taking and using mind mapping as a note-taking tactic, and I said I was going to be testing it out. And I normally write, when I'm preparing for the podcast, I'll write some notes and I scribble. I don't do a script. Can you tell? There's no script. Can you tell that? I think you can. So I usually do some notes and things. And there's sometimes some stuff on the screen, and there's always a notebook with some stuff. And I can often find myself getting a bit confused and wobbling between the 3 areas I'm looking at the same time. This time, wrote a mind map. So definitely something in my control. How do I take the notes and prepare for the podcast? Definitely in my control. So did myself a mind map, and I have to say, worked very well. So it's an added bonus in this week's episode around the idea of mind mapping, and that was shared in the No Jedi email. So there we go. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. It's been a pleasure to kind of decompress this last week or so that I've been feeling and tensing and turning it into something useful, a perspective that I know is very applicable, very practical in the space of healthcare and what you as leaders and team leaders and carers within the healthcare profession are dealing with at the moment. What I've done is created the tool, which has also got a bit of a summary page on it, as well as something you can download and actually use to draw out those areas which are your areas of concern, the areas you can control, and that space of influence that you can grow into. Thank you again for listening. I'm Katie, I'm your host, and I will be back next week with another episode of The Leadership Lounge. Take care. You are doing better than you think.